think we're at time, Rabbi. We have something a
Wonderful.
little different this morning from the cantor.
Lovely.
I've been kind of uh, zeroing in on this idea of lifting up the lowly and not and remembering and not forgetting the lowly. So this is a song by Ezra Furman, who is a queer Jewish musician and songwriter. This is from an album that he came out with in 2018 called Transangelic Exodus, which follows a narrative of Furman and an angel on the road running away from an oppressive government. Um, so, and he quotes some liturgy at the end from the liturgy that precedes Micha Mocha in the daily morning liturgy, that talks about a God who rescues the Anavim and who lifts up the Shvalim, the ones who are laid low. So I hope I do this one justice. This one's a little bit different from what I have typically offered in the past. Some angels will carry you homeward. Other angels you don't want to meet. My guardian angels got wings of tinfoil and cigarettes found in the streets. My angel's got eyes like a housing project. He was born inside a guitar. And I can't forget his red lips and eyelashes and his how'd we end up where we are. There's nothing doing on the main street. Let's take the alley for the evening. And we're driving a car that won't slow down, making ourselves up in the rearview mirror. I know God lifts up the lowly. I know God lifts up the lowly. We're searching the trunk every morning. We tore out a tracking device, and I pray for plagues to come down on this Egypt, and I dream of blood, fire, and lice. I wake with my coat for a blanket. My angel's been up for an hour. And I've looked deep into this frail human body, and I know that I carry a power. We'll never make it on the main street. They'll force us back into the alleyways, and we're rearranging furniture in a burning house. God lifts up the lowly. I know God lifts up the lowly. רם ונישא גדול ונורא, משפיל גאים ומגביה שפלים, מוציא אסירים ופודה ערבים ועוזר דלים ועונה לעמו בעת שווה מלאה.
Just breathtaking. Wow. Cantor, thank you again for your exquisite taste. It is to have this kind of breath to musical offering. I'm seeing that, many people agree that this is a profound psalm. I'd love to be able to lift up more of Ezra's work, so Cantor Nimi, or I saw that Ben Kushner is also a big fan of Ezra's. Let's put some links on the Facebook group, because
Sure. And I just want to say the reason I brought it is because it reminded me so much of what so many people in this class have done with their own offerings for the Psalms, where they take a phrase and really use that as a jumping off point to create something really personal and meaningful. And I saw that really what Ezra did. So I wanted to kind of bring that as an example.
How perfect. And really just gorgeous.
Cantor, may I send everyone a copy of the lyrics? There are some requests for them already.
And
Cantor?
I will also share I have a particularly favorite YouTube recording of Ezra performing this that I will also put that link in the chat.
Terrific. Great.
Perfect. And yes, you know, to be able to see such a talented singer-songwriter's body of work is important, but you chose this one so well. It is perfect for this morning. It is perfect for this group. It's really an extraordinary offering. Thank you. I don't want the class to end, but I am already looking forward to hearing it again at the end of class. All right, dear friends, we are going to continue with our Psalm 10 study. I think we have it in us to make it to the end of the Psalm today. We were on verse 12. There are 18 lines in this Psalm, a very auspicious number. And then we'll be able to devote some time today or tomorrow to other translations of the Psalms. You know, I've been sticking very closely to Alter's translation because I feel like it's one of the ones that opens up so many doorways into the Hebrew as we look at it very carefully and closely. Yesterday, we started bringing in some other translations. I believe somebody brought in Bernstein's translation of a particular line because it was so poignant and so beautiful. If you have those in front of you and if they're speaking to you, by all means share them. But my hope is to be able to line up a couple next to one another so that we can be comparing the English once we have a really solid grasp on the Hebrew and can see where these translations depart and intertwine in their interpretations. And then finally, as promised, we wonder, is this part of a greater whole? Is this psalm only half the story? Or is this psalm an individual offering all by itself? And so that's what we'll continue to look at. As we go back into the Psalm's Hebrew, Psalm 9 was a lot more solid in its acrostic, but still I think Ira had the best acrostic that anybody's offered in these two Psalms. It was much more true to the sense of poetry that an acrostic has. From verses 12 on, look at the beginning Hebrew letters of each of the lines. See if you can tell where the acrostic picks back up again, because this has been a real departure from that poetic format. Alter has a really clear way of delineating that in his translation. He's got the Hebrew letters in the margins, and some of our translators have been more true to the acrostic format than others for great reasons. And that's just something I want you to keep in the back of your mind that we're not going to be looking at as closely today, but if you notice it, shout it out. So once again, I'm going to share my screen with the Sepharia translation. Harold will be the voice of Robert Alter in our ear. And I would love, it was so fabulous to have so many Hebrew readers yesterday. If anybody would like to read a Hebrew phrase, you know, whatever Hebrew level you are, if you're in Kita Aleph and you want to say, I found these letters from our class's study, that is magnificent. And anybody who would like to give it a shot would be wonderful. And again, I want to compliment the Hebrew reading of everybody who read yesterday, of Saul, of Sarah, Dina, and Jeffrey. And if there's anybody who I forgot or who wants to read today, put your hand up or put into the chat. I'm going to share the screen. We'll go through the translation of what we have studied so far, and we're going to pick up at verse 13. So I need a Hebrew reader volunteer for verse 13 when we get there. I'm sharing successfully. Can I see some thumbs up?
Lori Krotman says that as an Aleph, she feels like she has learned enough to read verse 13 for us.
Great. And Lori, you've got a little time before we get there to be perusing it. And that'll be magnificent. Thank you. And I see that Jeremy is also raising a hand to read. Wonderful. We're going to keep tabs. So Kuma Adonai, rise Adonai. Oh, wait, that was verse 12. Just reminding you where we were, right? Let's go all the way back up to the top, and that is 8. Oh my. Here we go. 10. So I'm just going to do JPS translation straight through. We'll pick up with Alter. We'll pick up with the Hebrew at verse 13 when Lori reads with us. Why, O Adonai, do you stand aloof, heedless in times of trouble? The wicked in their arrogance hounds the lowly. May they be caught in the schemes they devise. The wicked crows about their unbridled lusts. The grasping person reviles and scorns Adonai. The wicked, arrogant as they are in all their scheming, thinks, God does not call to account. God does not care. Their ways prosper at all times. Your judgments are far beyond them. They snort at all their foes. They think, I shall not be shaken, though through all time never be in trouble. Their mouth is full of oaths, deceit, and fraud. Mischief and evil are under their tongue. They lurk in outlying places. From a covert, they slay the innocent. Their eyes spy out the hapless. They wait in a covert like a lion in their lair, wait to seize the lowly. They seize the lowly as they pull their net shut. They stoop, they crouch, and the hapless fall prey to their might. They think God is not mindful. God hides God's face and never looks. Kuma Adonai, rise Adonai, strike at them, O God. Do not forget the lowly. All right. So Lori, take it away. Letters that you can point us to, words that you'd like to sound.
Okay, and please correct me all.
Yeah, this is a great Hebrew learning opportunity.
Yeah, okay.
For all of us. For all of us.
I need a Xanax here. Okay. Al met
Perfect.
Niet
Mm-hmm.
Rasha
Mm-hmm.
Elohim
Beautiful.
Amar
Mm-hmm.
Belibolo Tidrosh.
Excellent. Lori, so beautifully read. Every single word, completely perfect. And incidentally, you took some lovely pausal breaths right where our verse breaks were. That was wonderful. I'm really proud of your skills.
That's because I couldn't breathe. I was so nervous.
That was absolutely wonderful. And thank you for being so brave. All right, so our JPS translation says, why should the wicked person scorn God, thinking you do not call to account? So look at how closely 11, 12, and 13 are sort of deepening a theme. You know, we have an assumption God is not mindful. God hides God's face. And then a cry, rise Adonai, strike at them. And why should a wicked person operate under this assumption, thinking that you don't call to account? Harold, what does Alter have to say?
Alter says, why has the wicked despised God, has said in his heart, you shall not seek out.
Any notes about it, or?
No notes, no notes.
A stark translation, both with this interrogative, a different sense of the question. Why should or why does? I saw that Jeremy had a hand up, which I am assuming is to be our reader for verse 14. But any responses, questions, or comments about 13?
It's hard to figure now who has a hand up to read and who has a hand up with a question. Saul, Sarah, and Jeremy have their hand up, but I think they were all volunteering to read. And Ira also volunteered to read in the chat. Let me see. I guess if you could put questions in the chat so that we're not confused. No, I think we're ready to go to the next line.
All right, great.
A lot of kudos to Lori for doing her beautiful reading.
Seriously. A absolute role model for all Hebrew learners of all levels. Okay, so Jeremy,
Hi.
Please unmute yourself and tell us if that was you volunteering to read.
That was me volunteering to read. I'm having trouble with my screen. Harold, can you lower my hand now?
Yes, hold on. I'm now a physical therapist too.
Lower my hand.
Is lowered. Your hand is lowered.
Okay. So read.
Read
Yes,
on.
please.
Raita kiata amal vakaas
Right, the cha'as, yes.
v'chas
Mhm.
tabit lechet biyadecha alecha ya'azov chelecha yatum ata hayita ozer.
Excellent, excellent. Beautiful reading. Lovely. So the letters that aspirate a little bit, like a cha, whether it's a chaf or whether it's a chet, very well pronounced. Kind of difficult on our throats if we are primarily English speakers. It's not a sound we're accustomed to making. And then some of you might be familiar with this word yatom from Kaddish yatom, literally meaning orphan. So why, we're still on this theme of, does God even pay attention? There's an assumption that God doesn't. You do look. You take note of mischief and vexation. To requite is in your power. To you the hapless can entrust themselves. You have ever been the orphan's help. What does Alter say?
Alter says, "For you have seen mischief and have looked on vexation. The wretched leaves his fate in your hands. It is you who helps the orphan." And again, here Alter complains about the state of the text. The Hebrew is far less smooth. He says, "The wretched leaves his fate in your hands." The Hebrew is far less smooth than this. A literal representation of this sequence of Hebrew words would be, "To give in your hands upon you the wretched leaves." This could scarcely be the original form of the text.
So he is extremely pointed and literal about these lines here. So Harold, would you start from "to you"?
Okay, so
And I
the
can point out
wretched,
exactly what he's talking about.
so the wretched leaves his fate in your hands. It is you who help the orphan.
Sorry, what I was saying is
Oh, sorry.
Alter was like giving a literal translation. If you went word by word,
Okay, word by word says, "To give in your
yes,
hands
yep,
upon you the wretched leaves."
exactly. So I know that some of our Kita Bet were studying like, what does an adjective look like? What does a verb look like? Here's a verb right here, latet, to give. Bi yadecha, yad, like the pointer that we use for the Torah scroll. Upon you, remember, cha after a word means you, usually masculine singular. Any questions or thoughts about this particular line?
Nothing I'm seeing coming up in chat where we've asked for it, but I do
Um,
see, sorry,
Go ahead, Harold, please.
but I do see that Ira, who has not yet read, has asked if he could read the next line.
Excellent. The one thing I want to point out is we saw two different renderings of these first three words, ra'ita. So if we read it as JPS did, ra'ita, you do look. Ta ending in theory could function as the speaking to God in the second person. You look, but Alter had it as for you do look, noting mischief and vexation. Amal v'cha'as is mischief and vexation. So I think that this is a little bit more poetic, but I love the way it seems to answer that question. And I remember when reading this for the very first time with the class, when Yael and I were going back and forth, I got practically carried away with the idea of desperation. It's like, you do look, don't you? Almost the way it sounds in my head. I saw Cantor Nimi raised a hand, and I'm not sure if that's to read or to ask a question, but it's probably to ask a question.
I just wanted to point out that in this verse, the primary pause in the verse is actually not on the word hey lecha, but on the word beyadecha.
Yeah.
That in poetic trope, that's called oleve yored, and that's the actual like semicolon of the verse, the main pause of the verse. So the way that Safaria translates it, where it puts the period on To requite is in your power, which I'm assuming is what they mean, like in your hand. That's why they put the period there, because for them, for this translator at least, that's where the major pause is. Alter, I
Excellent.
think, seems to disagree, but he often does.
Yep, and he tends to be looking very closely at the words and their syntax and less at cantillation. Is just my impression. He
Well,
certainly takes note of it.
actually, that is where Alter puts the period. The
Ah,
wretched leaves his fate in your hands, period.
and I love that this is called Ole v'yored, above and below. And you notice that you've got a little cantillation mark up here above all of the letters. And when you look down below and you see this open parentheses, a mercha, even if you're in Kita Aleph, you're saying, that doesn't look like the Hebrew vowels I know. Most Hebrew vowels, just as a hint, are not curved. They are dots, they are dashes, they are sticks put together. Okay, so I had Ira as a reader for the next verse. I saw that Stacy raised her hand. Stacy, can you tell us if it's a question or a volunteer to read?
It's a volunteer to read.
Great. So perhaps you will be after Ira because you didn't read yesterday. All
Okay,
right,
thank you.
Ira, take it away. Verse 15, please.
Okay. Shivor zroa rasha v'ra tidrosh rish'o val timtza.
Gorgeous. Gorgeous. Well read. Oh, break the power of the wicked and evil person, so that when you look for their wickedness, you will find it no more.
Break the arm of the wicked and seek out evil. Let wickedness not be found. No notes, but he's more literal with arm instead of power, as he was with hand instead of might.
Exactly. We think of when the immediate association I have with the word zeroa is zeroa netuya, like an outstretched. You freed us from Egypt with an outstretched arm, describing God's intervention in that Exodus story. So certainly can be metaphorically ascribed with a sense of power, but literally is an arm.
Marcia Melnick is bringing in a translation from Matsuda for verse 14. Marcia, can you unmute yourself and tell us which word you're referring to? It's helpless instead of wretched, but I don't see where the wretched is.
Well,
Hapless probably in this translation, right?
oh, hapless. Okay.
No. Come back here.
Where is wretched?
So wretched might be an Alter's translation.
Yeah. Which word is he referring to then?
14, wretched.
Maybe I'm not.
Wretched leaves his fate in your hands.
Which Hebrew word?
So I've highlighted it on the Safaria page. Chet Lamed Chaf He.
That's wretched.
Yep, you can see like hapless, poor, and so here Safaria is being very close with its own translation. It's quite consistent, and Alter has given it this sense of wretchedness, which is a different connotation.
It sounds very different to me than helpless.
Yeah. But what is the distinction for you, Marcia?
Well, wretched and helpless, wretched seems worse. And it seems like it has a negative connotation. If you're helpless, there's no, the reasoning is not there somehow. You know, that layer of wretchedness, it's a judgment. It feels more like a judgment. I don't know. Does anybody else feel that? It's strong. It's much stronger.
Very strong. Is it in Emma Lazarus's New Colossus? Give me your tired, your poor, your help.
Your wretched refuge.
Your wretched refuse.
Wretched refuge.
Of your shores, yeah. Well, it doesn't strike me as a synonym for helpless or hapless. That's all.
There is a differentiation there. I hear you.
Okay, that's all.
All right. And of course, it brought me back up to the top. We're still in Psalm 10 at least. So Marcia was drashing. Marcia was creating more midrash, more story, more understanding out of this word in verse 14. Ira just read for us verse 15. And if we're ready, I can move to 16, where Stacy is going to read.
Hello. Ad 16, right?
Yes, please.
Adonai Melech Olam Va'ed. Adonai Melech Olam Va'ed.
Mm-hmm.
Abdu Goyim Me'adso.
Beautiful. Good choice of when to read, Stacy. This line is filled with very important words that are resonant to all of us. So when you think about the idiom in Hebrew, leolam va'ed, forever and ever, you can see a derivation of it here. Lamed before a word is a prefix meaning to or for, and then you've got the actual noun, olam va'ed. Olam is universe and can be a sense of space, but is often understood as a sense of time, limitlessness in time rather than in space. We've got the word goyim here, which is a very connotated word in idiom. When we talk about people who are not Jewish, we often refer to them as goyim, but literally it means nations. And it just means, any collection of nations. But it's interesting that, in our own internal speak, it means nations outside of us. And you can see that in this context, it also refers to outside nations, not including our own nation. Me'artso, here's the root eretz for land, like Eretz Yisrael. But the sadi is in the middle of the word. It's not going to have its sofit form. So Adonai is sovereign forever and ever. The nations will perish from God's land.
The Lord is king for all time. Nations are lost from his land.
And of course, I'm really glad that, as I am liberally droshing on the translation, you can actually see what the JPS translation is and what Safaria renders the translation, that those two lines are actually quite close in their translation, but because of my gender inclusivity references, they ended up sounding very different when I said them out loud. All right, Harold, do we have comments, questions about verse 16?
Let's see. There's a discussion going on between hapless and helpless. And then Ira says, the lamed does not appear here before olam, where we're used to reading le'olam va'ed. This is just olam va'ed.
Exactly, Ira. I think the reason why we kind of anticipate that lamed is because it's very common in liturgy. Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed, a response to mi chamocha, but it doesn't change necessarily the sense of the idiom, and it's just the way that it's rendered here in poetry.
And Saul has a question.
Yes, please.
Still, my question is about perish, because in the piece that Cantonimi sang on, today is Wednesday, Monday, the translation was, there will be no nation states. And Art Scroll and JPS and Alter all say perish, which to me means something totally different than no nation states.
Sure, it's no nation states is an abstract concept about the way we rule ourselves and each other, right? But this is awfully literal. This is...
I think that the nations will perish. There will be no I can maybe twist it so it's no nation states, but it could also mean that there are no people also if there are no nations.
Right, a land that eats its inhabitants is not far from our reference here. So I brought up the literal translation of the word, and it is pretty clear that it's perish. It's be destroyed. And I think that some of this is the sense that we bring as modern readers to this ancient text. I don't know if a denizen of the ancient Near East could imagine a world without nation states. And their definition of nation state would be very, very different than our own. Of course, it might be kingdom, it might be tribal. But remember how much, because so little was in humanity's control over outside forces, the hierarchical structures of leadership and rulership were very, very deeply ingrained. I wonder if it's sort of a privilege of our modern viewpoint. And that makes it incredibly relevant, you know, as we begin to imagine what a world would be that wasn't shaped by nation states and colonization in the way that we understand it, or what a world could be. But I'm not sure that the ancient Near Eastern reader of this text would jump to that conclusion. And that's what's beautiful about returning to text over and over again.
A few things in the chat. Cantonimi reminds us that that was Shir Yaakov's drash on the translation, not necessarily meaning to be a literal translation. Adria Benjamin volunteers as a first-timer to read 18. And Lori Spear asks the million-dollar question about who are these evildoers? I originally thought that the evildoers in Psalms, or maybe in this Psalm, were people within Israel. In this verse, it seems to have shifted to other nations.
Yes, very, very interesting, Lori. And I think that there's some material to support either side of the argument that you set up. And what if it does refer to both? What if the beauty of this psalm is that you could be reading as evildoers within and without, and drawing a parallel between those who do evil, regardless of their origin. Another thing that I feel obligated to say is that we wonder if this psalm is a product of single authorship. So Alter has been wondering if there are many hands at work in this psalm, and I wonder if that could be one of the indicators of where the author's voice changes. Maybe some people are exclusively referring to the evildoers within, and some people are referring to the evildoers without. I think both exist as possibilities. And I also want to point out the other million-dollar question, which is probably too complicated for us to get into before 10:45, which is when you talk about me'art so, from God's land, these nations will perish from God's land. Is it talking about Eretz Yisrael? And what does that indicate about the rulership of Eretz Yisrael? Saul is gesticulating very emphatically.
So,
And
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just as a surprise, I never thought of that. That it's
all right.
particular to one place.
Yep. It could be one place. It could be more widely understood. But you know, for me, I think because I've been reading a bunch of Peter Beinart recently, that's exactly where my head went. And it is a fascinating question what the future of God's land might look like, with and without the intrusion of nation states, or with or without the assumption of nation states. Yes, Harold.
Rabbi, there are two things. For those of us who are trying to figure out what this little tune running in our heads has been, it is John Lennon, Jeffrey Weiss, and Kenneth both post.
Imagine all the...
There's no countries, it isn't hard to do.
Yep, beautiful. I love that.
And then there's a more theological discussion of Jeremy says, if God is to rule, there cannot be political organizations in God's land. And Simon and Sherry say, if the nations perish, there will be no kings except Adonai. And Ira says, can it mean from his earth? Can't it mean from his earth? Nina says, well, actually the nations to perish are the Hittites, Jebusites, and Canaanites, who are in the Bible the people who are in the land that we will enter. And then Barbara and Liz say, Alter seems to say lost, which is true, whereas Safaria says perish. Can we go to that in what is, I guess, when you click, so Barbara and Liz, if you look at where the rabbi's clicking right now, the first thing that comes up is perish, vanish, go astray. And Alter is interpreting any active translation as an act of interpretation, which I think he is doing.
Yeah, and you know, so we've got there is a tertiary meaning here. It could be to be lost. You know, Alter didn't just completely like pluck that out of the clear blue sky. but even in the kal form, the most regular form of the verb, in the PL, which is often the intensifier, but not always, in the he feel, the causative, all of these things are pretty focused on destruction. And yes, you know, there is a very complicated question here that has existed for as long as nations have existed. Who is ruling by divine might? You know, that royalty will say that they are appointed by God, and you see that from ancient Egypt up until British monarchy and everything in between. And I think that Simon and Sherry and Jeremy's 2 points on the spectrum of, are human beings getting in the way of God's ruling, or are human beings the enactors of God's ruling? Are we getting it right, or are we getting it wrong in either of those senses? And then the final question about, like, couldn't it be understood as earth instead of land? It is not impossible. Obviously, the two things are very closely related. However, I think that the writer would have used the word for earth, Adam, instead of Eretz, especially when you've got it in conjunction with Goyim. That these are the two words that are often put together when you're talking about more like geopolitical boundaries instead of the natural world.
So Rabbi, there are more things, but I'm going to say I think it's time, if we're going to finish through line 18, to move on to line 17.
Yes, there was a first-time reader. Who was it?
It was Adria.
Adria, take us through 17. Give me just 1 second as I close this, and then of course have to scroll all the way down to verse 17. Just a second. Here we go, here we go. Adria, please. Adria, we don't hear you yet.
Adria, you're muted.
Now I hear you. I hear you chuckling, so that's a good sign.
The most articulated sentence. You are muted. Okay. Ta'awat, Anaim, Shmata, Adonai.
Just a little louder, Adria. Can you, if you could?
Ta'awat.
Yep.
Anaim.
Great.
Shmata, Adonai, Tachin, Libam, Takshiv, Aznecha.
Lovely, beautiful. And you got a bunch of words in which the vav really acts as a consonant instead of a vowel. So I'm pointing out down here in the word yatom, which we talked about earlier, orphan, the vav is acting as a vowel. It doesn't make a v sound. It just makes its O sound. But ta'avat, anavim, these are places where the vav is really acting as the consonant that it is, which is confusing for those of us who are learning Hebrew and are associating it often with, like, okay, well, where are the dots? What am I looking for? Do I pronounce this O? Do I pronounce this U? Remember that sometimes vav is just a consonant. You will listen to the entreaty of, and this is Cantor Nimi's favorite word, anavim, the lowly, the humble, many other translations. O Adonai, you will make their hearts firm. You will incline your ear.
So altar is not that different. The desire of the poor you have heard, O Lord. You make their heart firm, your ear listens. And a note says, the conclusion of the psalm, formally signaled by the initial letter Tav, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, returns to the thanksgiving theme that was sounded at the beginning and thus appears to be part of the original poem.
Excellent. Thank you. Thoughts about this verse?
Okay, let's see what we got here.
And, you know, so the acrostic isn't great, but you got a shin here. You got a tav here. That's what Alter's talking about.
No notes. I think that they're eager for us to.
Let's do it. Were there any other first-time readers who wanted to read 18, or should we return to Saul, who has been patiently waiting in line, allowing those who have not yet read to go before him?
Your choice, Rabbi.
Take it away, Saul.
Lishpot yatom vadach, Baal Yosef od la'arot enosh min haaretz.
Gorgeously read, well finished. So this is a clear continuation of the line, even though we've got these colon marks here. Remember that according to the Masoretes, these are our best guesses of where one line ends and begins. So don't think that they have to be separate ideas or completely separate sentences. They could be continuations. So if God is listening to the desire of the lowly, making their hearts firm, God's going to incline God's ear to, what is God inclining God's ear towards? To champion the orphan and the downtrodden, that humans who are of the earth tyrannize no more. Or maybe I'd translate that more as that mortals who are of the earth tyrannize no more. And interesting, you know what, the person who said, can't we translate this as earth instead of as land? And I said, when you're in context with goyim, maybe not so much. We are using the exact same word here. We're using eretz. We are not using adama. And the word in its relationship is enosh. Many of our CBST chorus members have a very deep relationship with this word, which means mortality, you know, a human lifespan, which is limited rather than expansive and infinite the way that God is. But I just want to say, you were right. Okay, all of that to say, Harold, what does Alter have to say?
Alter says, to do justice for the orphan and the wretched, and let none still oppress man in the land, with a note. The very last words of the psalm, once more, are not entirely transparent in the Hebrew. The concluding phrase in the Hebrew is literally from the land, which seems better suited to a verb such as wipe out or drive out than oppress. But the Hebrew verb used means rather to oppress or to terrorize. So you wouldn't normally say, you'd say to drive out from the land or oppress in the land. So he plays with the words a little.
And I just highlighted the word that Alter is talking about and some of its definitions.
And then Lori again points out that in 17, haaretz is translated in Safaria, JPS says land, but in 18, it's earth. So in 17.
Not in 17, maybe in 16.
16, yes, sorry.
Yeah, me'artso, there we go. There we go.
So this is actually one of the things that I was reading about this King James Version. What do you do when Hebrew is a language that doesn't mind repeating the same word over and over and over again? In English, it seems leaden. How much liberty do you give yourself to change the translation in English when the same word appears over and over in Hebrew?
Yep, and you know, what is the poetic impact of using the same word over and over again, a leitmotif, through the work itself, and perhaps less to do with the accuracy of its translation and more to do with the sound as it hits our ears. And remember that though we don't know how these were meant to sound or how these were meant to be sung, though over history we have read them more often than we have heard them, they were probably created to be caught by our ear rather than our eye. And those are two very different precepts when it comes to writing.
So we did it?
Yeah. We should get sung out. I just want to give one opportunity if there's anybody who has any questions or any commentary, because this is the last verse of the psalm, and tomorrow we're going to move into multiple translations. Anything that's going to inform your discussion tomorrow.
You know, I don't see that here. What I do see is the majority of comments are about how beautifully our brave Aleph students did in their Hebrew readings.
Yay! And this is a wonderful, I mean, what an incredible summer. So many people in our community dedicated to their Hebrew learning, which is often a very scary proposition when you're an adult, when you are expert in all of the things that you have devoted your life to becoming really proficient at, to take on a new skill. That's probably difficult, and to put yourself in the seat of a student. Thank you for doing that. Okay. Unless there's anything else, I will hand it over to Cantor Nimi to sing us out with that gorgeous, gorgeous piece by Ezra that I've been looking forward to all class.
I will just ask you one question, Rabbi. There is a note for everyone who has Alter on page 37 of the introduction. There is quite a long note on on Psalm 9 and 10 in the question as to whether or not they are one or two. So if you have Alter, or if you have my scan that I said of the introduction, take a look, page 37.
Yes, and this will wonderfully inform your opinions tomorrow as we study, are these Psalms 1 or 2?
Rabbi, if you could stop sharing so I could share
Yes,
the text.
certainly. I'm covering up the thing that lets me share. Here we go.
I had a quick question, Rabbi, about these notations that you use on the side when you're explaining the word, qual and these other names.
Sure.
What is that?
Those are, in Hebrew, those are called binyanim. These are the buildings into which we organize verbs. So in English, we say this is an active verb, this is a passive verb. Same in Hebrew. We just use different names for whether it's an active, passive, reflexive, the like.
Thank you.
Okay. Some angels will carry you homeward. Other angels you don't want to meet. My guardian angels got wings of tinfoil and cigarettes found in the street. My angel's got eyes like a housing project. He was born inside a guitar. And I can't forget his red lips and eyelashes and his how we end up where we are. There's nothing doing on the main streets. Let's take the alley for the evening. And we're driving in a car that won't slow down, making ourselves up in the rearview mirror. I know God lifts up the lowly. I know God lifts up the lowly. We're searching the trunk every morning. We tore out a tracking device. And I pray for plagues to come down on this Egypt, and I dream of blood, fire, and lice. I wake with my coat for a blanket. My angel's been up for an hour. And I've looked deep into this frail human body, and I know I carry a power. We'll never make it on the main streets. They'll force us back into the alleyways. And we're rearranging furniture in a burning house. I know God lifts up the lonely. I know God lifts up the lowly. רם ונישא גדול ונורא, משפיל גאים ומגביה שבלים, מוציא אסירים ופודה ענבים, ועוזר דלים, ועונה לעמו בעת שבם אליו.
Just wonderful. Thank you. I really look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow, where we take this psalm to a new level in a couple of different ways. And if I don't see you tomorrow, I do want to say it has been such an honor, a privilege, and a true pleasure to be able to teach this class and to be with all of you in this learning community for the past 2 weeks. I am going to hang out for a little bit. I saw that there were a couple hands raised, but see you tomorrow if we don't see you sooner. And today is Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, Tet Vav B'Av, and this is a holiday that is associated with love of all kinds in Jewish community. So may you come to know love today from the people you are closest to or from the people you only just meet on this Tu B'Av.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Certainly. Oh, Sarah Siegel had her hand raised, but I think she might have checked out of class. I see that Shep's got his hand raised. Shep, what's on your mind?
Nothing really, but I just was thinking that in the Bible, when they say nation, they don't necessarily mean nation state. But the Jews were seen as a nation, and mostly we didn't have a state. We were a nation apart, but we were in the desert wandering, and we didn't have a state. So nation state was an invention in the late 19th century.
Absolutely. And so it is kind of an anachronism for us to use the phrase nation state. That being said, there were certainly power structures in place, whether they were movable or immovable.
Yeah, we had a state too. It was the Kingdom of Israel, But also we were a nation.
But not, and we might not have defined it as such until the Hasmonean dynasty. We might have defined it as such before then. I said it was a major digression that would take us past 10:45. And look, it's 10:52.
They have multiple meanings. Adama,
absolutely.
Eretz, Olam. It's complicated.
Thank you for bringing that complexity to us, Shep. I appreciate it.
Tomorrow, Rabbi.
Bye, Shep. Lisa, what's on your mind?
You're the best.
Hi, Rabbi. Good morning. I was just wondering about this phrase, Baal Yosef Od. Does that mean something literal, like the master of gathering more? I mean, what does that mean?
Let me jump there. Baal Yosef Od. And I just want to point out, for anybody who knows somebody whose name is Joseph or Yosef, that is the root of their name, which has to do with like increase and abundance. Lisa, can you give me a verse number for me to jump?
I'm looking at my interlinear thing here, and where are we? It's right. Oh, I guess it's the last verse. It's Yud Chet.
Okay. Yeah, I see. So that is
I'm always so interested in the literal, like what these words literally mean.
Yeah.
Even though we'll never know exactly what they meant, but yeah.
And I went to check really quick. So Baal, in terms of like mastery or the master of something, has an ayin in the middle. And I checked really quick to make sure, like, it could have been a derivation. It does not look like it is. What I'm seeing here is that Baal is not, or hardly.
Okay.
So that they hardly increase. We've got like an intensifier between Yosef and Od, more and more. You've got the verb and you've got the noun for more. So it sounds like a very intense phrase to say that they will definitely, absolutely not increase their tyranny.
Okay.
Yeah. That's my quick read on the subject.
Okay. I don't see the word tyranny in there, but okay.
Oh, so I can share my screen again and we can look at it together, which is probably a little better than me just like narrating what I'm looking at. Let me move a couple things around real quick. Okay, so we're in verse 18. You can see where I highlighted Baal to make sure it's not Baal. You know, you've got like the slight guttural with an ayin. And this here is where I think they're getting tyranny from, like cause to dread or cause to be terrified.
Right. Okay, so it's implied.
You know, we don't actually see tyranny in here in any of the meanings, but tyranny, you know, as Shep said, like maybe tyranny is an anachronism when we describe the ways that people reign power over one another, you know, like absolute power was kind of the norm in the ancient Near East. But we do get this sense of, so you're going to champion the orphan and dach, the downtrodden, the oppressed, and no more will the increase of terror on behalf of humanity, like those people who are mortals, from the earth.
Thank you.
Good talk. All right, let me get out of sharing my screen. And I will see everybody tomorrow.